Thank you all for coming this evening to attend this public meeting on the WestCOG noise abatement feasibility study for the New Canaan branch of the Metro North Railroad. I'm Todd Fontanella, I'm the project manager, and with me tonight for our consultant team, SRF Consulting Group, it's Andrew Milkey and Justin Scott. So we'd like to note that we're joined this evening by Luke Buttenweiser from the City of Stamford, representing Mayor Caroline Simmons, and also First Selectman John Zagrodzky of the town of Darien. In preparing for this meeting, we notified state representatives and senators of the 3 New Canaan branch host communities, as well as representatives from Metro North Railroad and Conduct, as well as residents who reached out to us during the course of the study, and some of whom I interacted with this evening. Any officials that would like to introduce themselves that are here this evening?
Sure. I'm Tracy Marr. I'm state representative in Darien.
Tracy, thank you. Okay, so before we get started, we have 2 pre-meeting items just to cover. If you haven't already done so, please sign in at the table at the entrance to the meeting room and let us know whether you want to speak during the question and comment period of the meeting. If you plan to speak, please limit your comments to 3 minutes so as to ensure adequate time for everyone who wishes to speak. This meeting is planned to be over at 8:30. And second, if you have written comments, you can submit them to me by the end of this meeting or send them to me by email at tfontanella.westcog.org. We will be accepting written comments through the close of business on Tuesday, October the 8th, and that will help us accurately capture your comments for meeting record-keeping purposes. So as an overview, this study was conducted by WestCOG's consultant, SRF, on behalf of the towns of Darien, New Canaan, and the City of Stamford. This study, which WestCOG was authorized by Conduct to undertake, began in late 2022 as an important first step, recommended by former Conduct Commissioner Giulietti following a January 2020 public meeting organized by Representative Matt Blumenthal. This study was scoped to form the technical analysis that would determine the feasibility of creating a quiet zone along the New Canaan branch, as well as to prepare the background information that would be required in the event that the communities chose to apply to the Federal Railroad Administration. As part of this study, an on-site meeting was held in March 2023 in which representatives of Conduct's Office of Rail, Metro North Railroad, and the Federal Railroad Administration participated. Further, a survey was circulated to the public in June through September of 2023. We are truly appreciative of the public's participation in this survey, in which over 2,000 individual comments were received, the results of which will be summarized in the final report, which will be soon made available. Note that these survey results were also available on WestCOG's website. So moving on to the presentation, I'd like to go over a few PowerPoint slides to illustrate what WestCOG and other stakeholders have had for involvement in this project. So first of all, to introduce us, WestCOG, we are a forum for municipal chief elected officials to come together and discuss issues of common interest, as well as to cooperate on a variety of initiatives. We engage with the communities on a number of different topics, as shown up here, but most particular to tonight's presentation is transportation. WestCOG is host to 2 federally recognized metropolitan planning organizations, the Housatonic Valley and the Southwestern region, covering 18 communities. The New Canaan branch is located within the Southwestern region. The purpose of the MPO is to ensure that existing and future expenditures of federal funds for transportation projects and programs are planned based upon a well-established planning process. To recap a little bit, the MPO planning process began in 2020 when the communities identified a need for this study. Following this, WestCOG prepared a formal request for approval of the study work scope, which was granted by Federal Highway and Federal Transit and Conduct in 2022. Then, after development of a request for proposals, SRF Consulting Group was engaged by WestCOG using the established procurement process. SRF began work on the study in 2023 and subsequently conducted data research, site visits, engaged with stakeholders, conducted the survey, and prepared recommendations, which brings us to 2024, at which point the study has been completed, and tonight's presentation will highlight key aspects of it. So why is this study important? It is a planning study. It is a first step. It is essential for framing future discussion of this topic and for the community's decision-making process. We anticipate that for next steps, each of the communities will decide whether they want to work together to proceed with required tasks, particularly to prepare an application to the Federal Railroad Administration to establish a quiet zone. Who has been involved? It's important to note that this study involved many partners. The U.S. Department of Transportation provides federal funding. Federal Railroad Administration oversees rail projects and requests for quiet zones. CONDOT owns the New Canaan branch. Metro North Railroad operates the rail service. WestCOG, through its consultant, has conducted the planning study, and the municipalities are MPO members for whom this study was prepared. So now we'll move on to the technical presentation. I'll turn to Justin Scott from SRF. Justin will lead the technical presentation. Afterward, we'll be taking public comments.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. Everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm Justin Scott, as Todd mentioned, with SRF Consulting Group. I am a freight planner in our Minneapolis office and led this effort. This slide is illustrating our study area. This Metro North Railroad includes 11 crossings in this New Canaan branch line corridor. You can see some yellow dots and some blue dots on this map. The yellow is illustrating a public at-grade crossing, and a blue dot is illustrating a private crossing. Private crossings are exempt from the quiet zone regulatory process, and so of all of these 11 crossings, we were very much focused on evaluating improvements at the yellow crossings here. A couple of quick hitting facts before we get in. These will become a little bit more apparent. There's some prerequisites for quiet zones. Every crossing needs to have a few things in place. Some of those are lights and gates and constant warning time, which we will get into. Every crossing in this corridor already has the lights and the gates, with the exception of Cemetery Road. Again, that Cemetery Road is a private crossing, so it's exempt. So we're good from the lights and gates perspective, but none of these crossings have that constant warning time technology. That constant warning time, really quickly, is just an advance warning. Really tells the gates when to come down as that train is approaching. So that's the need for that technology. So what is a quiet zone? A quiet zone is really simply just a section or a segment of railroad where train horns, the routine sounding of those train horns is removed. A lot of communities that we work with across the country are doing this and implementing quiet zones to improve quality of life. And folks we've heard through our public survey and our engagement that there's a lot of sleeping and hearing and health impacts that are also associated with railroad noise. A quick background on the quiet zone planning process. Way back in 1994, the FRA came out with a requirement for all trains at grid crossings that they were required to sound their horn at those crossings. Really in a desire to improve highway rail safety at all of these crossings nationwide. It's no surprise that as that train horn was introduced, that noise also increased. So 10 years later, the FRA came out with the quiet zone rule in 2005. That rule essentially stated that communities could implement a quiet zone by making some crossing improvements to improve safety at some of these crossings. There are some minimum requirements that I alluded to earlier. Every quiet zone has to be at least a half a mile long and include every crossing within that quiet zone limit. So while we have private crossings in our zone, those would be quiet, and those are included in this quiet zone. Here we are with those prerequisites here, the last 3 bullets. Every public at-grade crossing in a zone must meet these pre-qualifying criteria. They need to have lights and gates, which, as I mentioned, all of this corridor, the public crossings in this corridor do already have. They need to have power out indicators, and then this constant warning time detection technology.
Is there any way you could explain what that last technology is if you're not going to get to that later in the presentation?
We will take questions after. I'll quickly do that. It's really just that technology that allows each individual crossing to know in advance, and that's determined every crossing individually as that train is approaching at different speeds. If it's advancing towards a train station, if you will, that can vary. So that constant warning time really keeps track. That's a technology that's embedded in the actual rail to understand when that train is approaching.
And what is the current? What is being used for? Yeah, but the light goes on.
One of them pulling out of Springville Station then.
There is no constant warning time system anywhere on this part.
So, but then how does it work? How does the light go on and it goes down?
So a lot of them are an older school technology.
I think it's motion detection.
Motion detection. So there's basically a trigger away from it's on the rail line, but away from the crossing, that when it says, okay, it's in this area, then the lights start flashing, the gates come down essentially. That's an older school technology with the quiet zone. That's why they went to this constant warning time. So the train's going 5 miles an hour, it needs to go down a lot later. The lights and gates go down a lot later. Whereas if it's going 50 miles an hour, right, it needs to go down sooner. That's what this constant warning time detection does. So it's based on that train of the speed of the train, so the lights and gates go down at approximately the same time every time.
So if there is a truck driving on the track right now, the lights will go down? So,
If there's a truck driving on the track, like a railroad truck?
It's not to notice vehicles on the crossing, it's the train, it keeps track of that train speed. That's what triggers when the gates go up and down. It's not if a vehicle's on the crossing.
But if there's a high rail truck, for instance, like for the railroad, that's on, it would go down for that as well, because it's alerting that something's coming.
Of course, yes. So as we look to implement quiet zones and as we did our analysis here as a part of this effort, we looked at a risk analysis. That's really what the FRA uses to determine quiet zone applicability and implementation. So this risk analysis is based on the accident prediction model, which looks at highway volume and speed, rail volume and speed, that crossing surface condition, as well as the geometry. If it's a heavily skewed crossing and doesn't cross at 90 degrees, that comes into play, as well as a 5-year crash history and an understanding of crash type. All of these things really go into that accident prediction model to help us understand the risk at every single one of those 11 crossings in the zone. There's several thresholds that determine these risk levels and whether or not a particular corridor will or will not qualify for a quiet zone. I will get into these in a couple more slides, but just introducing these here, the NSRT, the nationwide significant risk threshold, is a national average of risk at every crossing in the country. So this average tends to increase annually. Right now the number is 15,488, and there's no unit to this number, it's just a risk index. So that's the national average. The risk index with horns then is sort of what is the existing condition. That's as trains are sounding their horns out there today, that's the RIWH. The QZRI then is what is adjusted after you take the train horn away, that risk goes up, that's that quiet zone risk index. We then, as a part of implementing a quiet zone and this risk analysis, will look to reduce that quiet zone risk index. After we take the train horn away, that risk goes up. We look then to reduce that quiet zone risk with some safety improvements and get that risk below one of two of those thresholds, either the risk index with horn or the NSRT. And if you are below one or both of those, if you're below the risk index with horns, you're exempt from those annual changes in that NSRT. This slide will help to clarify what I just ran through on the last couple of slides, illustrating that risk index with horns. That's where we're at today, just below 25. That's the risk in this New Canaan corridor. We take the train horns away, that's the blue bar on the left. That risk goes up to above 40,000. We then need to consider treatments at crossings in order to get that risk back down below the green line to qualify for a quiet zone. The next few slides are illustrative of the maps we have up here in front. I was so happy to see folks coming up and engaging and looking at those maps. These are illustrating our noise analysis. So we took out noise meters last March in 2023 and went out and measured the noise at these crossings using the FTA. So the Federal Rail Administration follows the Federal Transit Administration's noise analysis process. So we also followed that, and you can see some of those results here on these slides. Essentially, this is the noise shed, if you will. The heavy red circles here are severe impact areas and severely impacted areas, and you can see some of the households for each of these crossings. And then the blue circle, the broader circle, is sort of the moderate impact according to that FTA guidance. We did this for every crossing. This slide is illustrating Crescent, Glenbrook, and Riverbend. Riverbend was the highest of those three. We also, continuing north along the corridor, looked at Omega and Largo, and Camp and Hoyt. Hoyt and Camp have pretty large household numbers, and Cemetery Road being that private crossing in the middle of that residential area, incredible amount of households included in that moderate circle. Moving to the last section of crossings here up in New Canaan, looking at Richmond Hill here having the largest impact on households. The next series of slides dives into those improvement options I'm mentioning. So we take the train horn away, risk goes up. There's a host of approved safety measures that we can implement at crossings to reduce that risk at these crossings and bring that risk down. These supplemental safety measures are the measures and the treatments that the FRA has approved. We will get into these 4-quadrant gates, medians, closures, even grade separation and one-way streets. Alternative safety measures then are different permutations of the SSMs and just require additional FRA approval. This series of slides describe and illustrate some of these potential improvements. This slide is showing 2-quadrant vehicle gates. Considering here, really there's just that entrance gate, really blocking the entrance into the crossing area. For 2-quadrant vehicle gate installations, the railroad really controls much of the engineering and installation and the cost of implementing and constructing these. This is a picture of an example of these 2-quad gates. You can see here just that entry gate is really prohibiting vehicles from entering the tracks from that direction. 4-quadrant gates then are 2 quads times 2. You can see both that entrance gate here and the exit gate illustrated, showing that no one can then get in from any direction into that track crossing area here. Interesting to note with gates is there's an ongoing maintenance and operations cost that is associated with these that would be the responsibility of the municipality moving forward. So if we implemented gate improvements, those ongoing maintenance costs are something that we and you all should be considering. The risk reduction though for gates is really high, above 80%. This is a great illustrative example of a lot of the things that we're proposing to do here in this community, whether it be these 4-quad gates. You can see the gate that's nearest to us here is down farther than the gate behind it, that exit gate. So no one can get trapped on these tracks. You get that entrance gate goes down first, and then the exit comes down after that. This picture is also showing some pedestrian gates, these little gates off to the side, which we are also considering here at several of the crossings. Pedestrian gates are at the discretion of our crossing review team, and while we were out in the field with the FRA and with the DOT, we all thought that there was a need for these pedestrian gates to be considered here as well. Another improvement option is non-traversable medians. These are a little bit different than the 4-quad gates. Again, we need to have the lights and gates, the 2-quad lights and gates here to pre-qualify, but these medians really reduce the opportunity for motorists to drive around that entrance gate, which happens a lot and is a very unsafe scenario. So these medians really help to control that unsafe situation. The beautiful thing about these medians is that the city is in control of their implementation and engineering and cost and scheduling, rather than the gates, which are sort of under that railroad jurisdiction. Very similar risk reduction here to the 4 quad gates. Interesting to note the sort of cost difference here between medians and gates as well. Significant cost savings by doing medians, but the risk reduction that you get from these medians compared to the cost of 4 quad gates is incredibly effective. Here's an example of this non-traversable median. You see that in the bottom of this screen here. These have to be 6 inches high. A lot of times we recommend them to be 8 inches to cover for future mill and overlay of the street surface. But this is really illustrative of that gate. Some of our clients will put these yellow bollards on top of them as well. This slide is illustrating another improvement strategy. Just closing the crossing is a great option as well. The picture here on the left is maybe a more simple application of this crossing closure strategy. And the picture here on the right is a little more beautiful and has some vegetation to go along with it. The last couple of strategies here, one-way streets are also an option. Costs are very variable here, and the implications to gate relocations and street conversions having to go to one-way pairs and sort of the broader traffic operations impacts of these one-way streets certainly needs to come into consideration. The last couple here, wayside horns is another implementation option. Here you can see this wayside horn is about 3/4 of the way up on this post here on the right. It's that little black box. This is an interesting approach here. You're not getting extremely quiet here. That wayside horn just really directs the noise rather than having a broad overcast of noise. It really just directs that noise down at the traffic in a less impactful way. The last one here is 3-quadrant vehicle gates, sort of a permutation of all of the above. You can see medians here on the left, and again, back to railroad control here and considering that ongoing maintenance cost. This is a good example of that. You can see the median here nearest to us, and then the gates and the infrastructure here. Moving on from those improvement strategies, a quick summary, a little bit more of a summary of our process. We were out here, as I mentioned, in March of 2023 to visit all of these crossings and evaluate these potential crossing improvements. We had representatives from the city, the Council of Governments, the railroad, the FRA, and the Department of Transportation out in the field participating with us to help us to identify solutions that would be implementable. And this is the recommended crossing improvement scenario that we came up with. Again, this is just focused on construction costs, so it doesn't include that ongoing operations and maintenance that would be considered here. But you can see we're recommending a host of 4-quadrant vehicle gates and pedestrian gate or fencing improvements. Glenbrook Road, for example, adjacent to the station there, thinking that it would be very helpful to include that fencing improvement as well as the vehicular gates there. Ultimately, the denominators here, we are recommending about $9 million in crossing improvements. And then another consideration is that constant warning time, which is a big unknown for us right now. The FRA has developed this constant warning time waiver for a reason, and we've seen that be successful in other parts of the country, and we would certainly recommend that you all consider that constant warning time upgrade in the waiver in this application. You can see the large number there, though, at the bottom. This is about a $20 million discussion that we're having here tonight. This slide summarizes some of the considerations that we wanted you all to be aware of when it comes to implementing a quiet zone. This first one we've discussed, sort of the probability of successfully achieving and receiving that constant warning time waiver is really an unknown for us at this point. If we were to break up these 11 crossings, let's say just Darien wanted to investigate a quiet zone, we would break up the 11 crossing zone and we would have to redo our analysis, that risk analysis for just the Darien crossings, for example. So if we were to break up this 11 crossing zone, we would have to essentially redo our work. The railroad design and engineering costs, while we work very closely with the Metro North Railroad, we do not know, they did not share with us sort of what those engineering and design costs might be, as well as what I've mentioned a couple times here, those ongoing maintenance costs of gates as well. Real quickly here, there's a couple of applications that are required if the municipalities do decide to move forward. There's a notice of intent which goes in first, sort of recognizing what we intend to do and notifying the FRA of our intentions, outlining those crossings that I had up on the table earlier. After we construct and implement over an 18 to 24 month period, we would then confirm with the FRA and with the Department of Transportation that we built what we said we were going to build and get their confirmation before we submit then a notice of establishment. That notice of establishment then triggers a 21-day implementation period, and then after that 21 days, the train horns are no longer sounded. Typically, once we have a financial plan in place, which we do not have right now, once that financial plan is in place, a typical quiet zone project implementation process typically takes longer than 2 years. This is my last slide, so I appreciate you all sticking around. This is a summary of the potential funding sources that we all can be considering and leveraging to implement quiet zone projects. There, unfortunately, is no state or federal program that's designated to implementing and building these quiet zones. There are, however, a variety of programs that can be leveraged in unique ways. Those programs are here on the slide. The CRISI program, the RAISE program, these are both federal grant programs. The Railroad Crossing Elimination is an FRA program that was just developed in 2022. The 2024 fiscal year for this RCE program has just expired. These grants were due a couple of weeks ago, but we are hopeful that this RCE grant program will exist in the next funding bill, and that grant program will live on. There's also, the FHWA does distribute funds to every state that are dedicated specifically to improving rail crossing safety. Those funds are a Section 130 program, and it's up to the Department of Transportation in each state and how they distribute those rail crossing safety funds. And then there's municipal funds. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Zagradski.
I brought my checkbook, I'm just going to write it. Thank you, Justin and Andrew. These guys were total professionals throughout this process. Their firm specializes in transport engineering consulting, and they did a very thorough job, and it's very impressive. I also wanted to thank Todd for leading all of this. He did a great job as well. So, So I've talked to a ton of people about this. I think this has gotten to be a more severe problem because back when we had the older trains, those horns were kind of muted and sometimes they didn't work really well. And we get the new trains and they're a lot louder. And I think that's one of the things that sort of triggered a broader public interest in this topic to try and get it resolved. So just to summarize where we are, there's a certain risk level associated with each of these crossings. And by taking away the horns, you raise the risk. And so you've got to get the risk back down to a certain level before anybody is going to consider an application for a quiet zone. So all the recommendations that they came up with on these particular crossings were intended to actually solve that problem and get the risk rating down for all of the relevant crossings in order to qualify. One of the things about all the recommendations that they came up with on that cost slide, which is worth going back to that, on this cost slide, so you see here the five sort of crossings where they recommended this. One of the questions I asked them was, so if all the municipalities come in and do this, is this what they're looking for? Would we actually qualify for a quiet zone? The answer to that is is yes. I mean, it's as close to yes as you can get. But these guys understand all this professionally and specifically said, look, if you guys do this, this is what's required to get to that. Yes.
Just curious, because I think if we were talking about 11 crossings, this slide only doesn't have 11. Do the other ones already?
That's a very astute understanding. So you do not have to treat every one of the 11 crossings. The way we look at this is we evaluate crossing by crossing risk, and we try our best to treat the highest risk crossings because that's where the biggest bang for our buck is. So we looked at risk for each crossing, and there's actually a slide in this presentation if you're interested to see it afterwards, crossing by crossing, looking at that risk, and then that helped us to determine which crossings to treat. It was incredibly fortunate for this effort that each of these crossings sort of generally fit into one of the 3 municipalities. And so we felt really excited about the distribution of these costs across those 3 communities as well.
Yeah, so keep in mind that the risk rating is not by crossing, it's for the entire quiet zone. So that's why you make changes to just the higher risk crossings. And then when you finish that work, the entire risk rating for the proposed quiet zone is what's changed. And once you get below that threshold, that's what then qualifies it for a quiet zone. Okay. So do you see these astronomical numbers here? That $9 million is an estimate. I think anybody who's been involved in municipal construction knows that even that estimate can get a lot worse depending on inflation. So that's a preliminary estimate of what it would cost to put these changes in, exclusive of the operating costs that the municipalities would have to bear to manage that improved crossing infrastructure. It's important, though, this constant warning time upgrade. So just to reiterate, that's so that depending on the speed of the train, the time between when the train is coming and when the gates actually come down is the same. So a fast train requires the gates to come down quicker. A slower train, well, you don't have to have that. And so we just don't have that technology. One of the things on the New Canaan line, so one of the things they require to be considered for a quiet zone is you got to have this technology. And that's this extra $10 million to put that in. As part of our application, we can apply for a waiver of that requirement. Don't know whether that would happen, but you can see this is 50% of the cost of this to get this done. It's uncertain whether they would grant it, but I would certainly recommend that if we go through a process like this, that you apply to see if we can get that waiver. We don't know what other requirements they might put on us if they grant that waiver, so hard to say how much this would reduce the cost. It might not be by 10 million. Trevor?
How long would that waiver process or application take?
So it's within the entire 2-year process. Yeah. To get that done, sort of scrutinized.
So if we said, all right, we're going to try to apply for that waiver, would we hear back in 6 months and then like, okay, well, we got to revisit it. We're not going to get approval without, that.
It's within the 18-month evaluation period.
It is.
Right?
And it's a waiver in the municipalities would send that waiver in collaboration with the Department of Transportation.
So it's all done concurrently with that application.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just a question around the waiver. Like, this line is particularly slow, comparatively speaking, to other lines.
Right.
Does that factor into getting potentially a waiver?
The short answer is yes, but that decision is not up to anyone in this room.
Yes, sir.
If you get the waiver, do you still bring the risk down from 45,000 to 25,000?
Yes.
You still do. So we don't need that.
That's the intention of the FRA waiver, is to be applied in corridors like this.
Right. It's not part of the risk calculation. It's a requirement for a quiet zone. If I understand.
Yeah, it's a prerequisite. In order to have a quiet zone, you have to have that technology. So in order to really even get in the game, you've got to have that. Then you also have to then lower the risk.
It's separate and
In
apart
addition
from the
to-
risk calculation itself. Someone else. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, different topic. When you were running through the different options, the raised median seemed to be like a fraction of the gates. Here you're suggesting gates on all the crossings, so can you talk us through why?
Absolutely, yeah. The short answer to that is we didn't have space for medians. A lot of the roadways where these crossings are tight lanes, 10 feet or less, and there's land use constraints outside of the roadway. So we just didn't have the space to add these medians in a lot of cases here.
Sorry.
It gets very technical in terms of the requirements for these medians. You can't have any driveways or roadways, commercial access in that area. So that's what Justin's referring to in terms of not having the space and the land use. So that diagnostic median, if you recall, there were a number of agencies, WestCOG staff, DOT, what have you, and it was basically, okay, the consensus was then to go to these 4 quadrant gates. Yes, they're more expensive, but it's a better fit really based on the design of these crossings.
It's also, some of these crossings are very dark. So if you have a raised median, you'll have cars going on the raised median. So you'll have.
Say that again.
Since cars are driving over the raised median anyway, put them in place.
Like all the-
But it's high enough to prevent that. A non-traversable median is anything above, in excess of 6 inches high, and it's to prevent vehicles from driving over on the ground.
Yeah, no, but by mistake, they will go over. You know, because it's so dark in the night.
They shouldn't without knowing.
Without damaging. I mean, if you got a monster truck, sure, you probably could.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with this technology, but in terms of emergency vehicles, how are they able to maneuver these non-traversable medians?
So we're actually looking at 4 quadrant gates generally, but they can basically with an emergency vehicle, it would drive through just like a passenger vehicle, essentially.
But if they're caught on the non-traversable median, they're going to have to wait.
We're not
They
ready.
have to wait, yeah, they're not supposed to go around either, because the reason that people are waiting is because there's a train approaching. So we need to keep the tracks clear so the train can go through, because otherwise you got another emergency on the
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, the question is how does all this get funded? As they said, there's not really a federal grant or state grant program that funds specifically quiet zones. There are a few other sources that we might tap for this, but it's largely going to likely fall on the municipalities to consider this. There's a few ways that this could be done. Obviously through bonding, that the municipalities can just go out and borrow to create these quiet zones. None of this, as Justin said at the beginning of the presentation, this is a first step in the process. So the first step is simply technical feasibility, and so this answers that question. Yes, it is technically feasible. The real question is now next, where do we get the money to do something like this? None of this has been discussed at any depth in any of the 3 municipalities. So Deanna Carlson is here this evening there. She's the first selectman in New Canaan, but not for New Canaan, not for Darien, and not for Stanford. We haven't had these discussions yet. This is an astronomical sum of money, especially if we don't get a CWT waiver to consider for those municipalities. As Justin said, it's convenient that the 6 crossing improvements, 2 each in each of the 3 towns, so it's roughly a kind of 1/3 split. I mean, not to oversimplify in terms of the cost that each municipality would bear, but still you would have to divide either $10 or $20 million by those 3 municipalities to get this done. So we would have to start the discussions in each of those towns to test whether they've got the capacity to consider something like this. One other interesting thing I'm still looking into is this notion of potentially a special taxing district. So what that means is that the folks who directly benefit from this, those would be identified and they would be responsible for the incremental taxes to service the debt associated with these projects. Interestingly, I found out today from our tax assessor that there are several properties, at least in Darien, this is how this works, that actually have a discount in their taxes that because their properties are located in the proximity of this. And so it's easy to identify, at least at first blush, the houses that are most directly affected by this because they've had a property tax discount that's allowed because of their proximity. So there's a lot more work to do on this. In terms of next steps, I certainly will discuss it with the Board of Selectmen in Darien, let them know that this study has taken place. But more importantly, I would talk to our Board of Finance and others, say in our RTM, that are responsible for making these financial decisions. I think I can speak for all 3 towns when I say that everybody's got a lot of competing financial priorities right now. So this would just simply have to be added into those discussions and made part of a broader strategy for each town to decide. One thing to keep in mind is something that Justin said, which is this is an integrated recommendation. If you pluck out any part of these, or if there's one town that decides they don't want to do this has to be rethought because the whole idea was to create a quiet zone along the entire New Canaan branch. And if one piece falls away, that study has to be repeated. It would slow this process. So unfortunately, it's kind of a take it or leave it package. Anything different than this would have to be reconfirmed to make sure that we retain feasibility. So that's where we stand with this. Certainly more to come, but I think we've answered the first question, which is technical feasibility. Financially, that's also a very big question that we'd have to spend quite a bit of time on. Questions? Yes, sir.
In the interim, is there been any thought of mitigating the noise by just having some of the late night trains running as buses or something? We went through a whole summer where everyone took a bus, it seems like. Survive. But you know, we're not that close, but I've been in this house for 38 years, and you know, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning on Sunday, I don't think there's anyone on the train, and it's going through making the noise, and that's when it really bothers people, is when they're trying to sleep. So if they could do something just to cut back on the service or put busing in, it would really
I'll
help.
let these gentlemen answer that. My experience in studying all this is that the Federal Railroad Administration has a set of rules. It is global. It applies to every crossing everywhere in the United States. And so generally they're not in the habit of making any exceptions to any of that. Simply because one exception then begets thousands of exceptions that all have to be managed separately. And for that reason, they don't grant exceptions to these kinds of rules. They come out and set the schedule and it's global. Is that correct?
Yeah, Metro North would be the ones to set the schedule based on, supply and demand of users, right? If they said, okay, all of a sudden there aren't trains, well then you're right. You wouldn't hear the trains, but the regulation is if there's a train that's approaching the crossing, it's
They
going to
have a choice. Yeah, it's
But they
federal
do put
requirement.
buses in periodically when they're working on the tracks and stuff, and somehow.
And you could put in a request to say, would you guys consider just not having trains at this hour and
Right.
put in a bus service? That's something that,
Valid comment.
it's a good comment. Yes, sir.
This seems like Darien and Stanford only. Which one is New Canaan? I know it's Darien, is it?
Just New Canaan.
So just one is New Canaan, the rest?
Correct.
Is it just one that's New Canaan? Okay.
There's one. So just 3.6 million each?
That's all.
13. Sorry.
Has there been, I know this would be like the desired, most safe, most risk-reducing outcome. Is there like some minimum amount that would meet the threshold that's been studied that I'm sure would be a much less daunting figure than
You're looking at
20
it.
million?
This is it.
This was specifically designed to just meet the Fed's requirements for this waiver, right? So they were careful not to overdo this, simply because of the costs involved. And so we've asked that question many times in terms of whether there was a less expensive option, and the answer is no.
And if I could, John, as noted here, there's only 5 crossings that are being treated up to 11. That one graph that showed the 40,000 and then the 24, and this gets it down to 21, basically, right below that threshold. That's because this is the closest we can get. There's only a 3,000 point buffer there. If we make additional improvements, that price tag, the bill goes up. So this is really.
And the way they made those, where they selected to do these improvements for the dollars spent, that had the most impact on risk reduction, right? So if you did some other crossing or something like, when I said these guys were total professionals on that, this is what I'm talking about. They looked at it at that detail. So what you're seeing is not only the least amount of money we can spend, but also the most bang for the buck in terms of risk reduction through the selection of that crossing. Yes, ma'am.
This might be a question for Justin or Andrew, but.
I'm just here for entertainment.
This is super helpful, I feel a little hopeful. But in terms of the actual noise reduction, you mentioned, I saw the no horn sign. What about the crossing, ding, 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 ding? Is that part of that as well?
That stays.
That stays.
So, I just also want to point out, even though it says, sorry, I'm with the city of Stanford, just because it says no horn, doesn't mean that there'll be no horn. The operator, the engineer still has full authority to use his horn, or is there a horn at any time? So it's not a silent, so just want to point that out as well.
Yeah, a couple of great points there. So there will always be the bells dinging at the crossings. That's a safety mechanism that would still stay. Obviously, it's a lot less intrusive than the horn blast, but it would still be there. You're still going to hear locomotive sound as well. There's steel wheels on steel rails, right? You're still going to hear that. But it's that blast and the routine sound of that blast. And Colin's exactly right. If there's construction work, if there's a pedestrian that's nearby the tracks, somebody that's trespassing, you can't walk down the tracks, actually that's trespassing, or even if there's an animal on the tracks, the locomotive engineer has the right essentially to sound horn there for safety purposes. So. But 99% of the noise would essentially the routine sound would go away.
Quick suggestion. So now that there are 3 cities being involved and this cost is significant, would it help, or would you guys consider to put some sort of a timeline that, all 3 cities will need to have some sort of a, the action plan in motion? Because this, we just don't want to have this study done, and because of the funds, it just never goes anywhere.
Right. I can't commit for the other towns, but certainly by the end of the year, I would have those discussions internally. We're about to start our budget process, so capital projects are considered at this time. But I just want to stress that, particularly for Darien, we've got a lot on our plate generally in terms of capital projects. And so this would be slotted in and considered and ranked against all the other obligations that we've got in terms of capital spending. So certainly no guarantee in terms of where this would go. But we will take a look at it, and I'll make sure all the relevant authorities in our financial approval process take a look.
I just wanted to ask a question about, you had said that 15,000, whatever it was, risk factor increases annually or semi-annually, you said?
The FRA...
So if we're just under that, what are the dangers that ultimately...
Well, if we're under it, that'll continue to insulate us. That number, the last couple of years, it hasn't gone up. The FRA has been very busy. But the 5-year period before that, every year that number went up a few hundred. It's not a huge jump, but that number helps to insulate us. So that's the larger number of the 2 that we need to meet. So that will continue to insulate us in our zone if we implement it. Now, if an incident happens, that'll change the game. If there's an incident at any one of these 11 crossings, as we're having these funding and next steps discussions, that'll increase the risk at that particular crossing and change things quite significantly.
One of the benefits, let me careful here, because you have a lot of train traffic and a lot of vehicular traffic, your risk at these crossings is higher than the national average. That's why that risk index with horns is at that 24,000 mark. Getting below that for the zone as a whole would mean that you're actually safer for the entire zone than what it is with the horn sounding. And that's how you qualify, essentially. So, in a way, the national average there, that 15,000, is somewhat irrelevant because we're getting below that level where the horns are sounding, if that makes sense.
These are pretty serious. My first job out of college, I was a bank examiner for the state of Texas. And there was a guy that had come on a year after, and I was sort of in charge of being a mentor to him. And his entire family was wiped out in an accident at one of these crossings down in Texas. Both his parents, his grandmother, his only sibling, and his sibling's girlfriend all died because of an unprotected crossing. And I remember that for years. And it's always struck me that you may look at some of these things and look at the expense and say it's ridiculous, but for somebody who's affected like that guy was 36 years ago, never got over it. And so it's very important to take this seriously. It's extraordinarily dangerous. People get hurt all over the country, and there's just been a lot of carnage for stuff like that, particularly, as they were saying before, people ignoring this stuff. Part of the reason they talk about these medians is that you got people still to this day who will drive around these things, and it's crazy if they think they're going to beat this train. And a lot of them don't every year. So that's why the Federal Railroad Administration takes this so seriously, and why some of these regulations are so onerous, because the danger is so great. So we really do have to make these improvements. It would be irresponsible to our respective communities not to make these investments and increase the risk exposure for these families who live in this area.
If I could just piggyback on that, I get the sense from the room here that the primary reason for this is quality of life, right? To be able to not hear the horn, sleep through the night, whatever it is. Safety is always job one. And that's where, to John's point, making sure that all these crossings are safe, that they meet the requirements and are done per the letter of the law, the federal rule here. That is the utmost importance, is that they're done safely. And the secondary benefit, which is very important, is quality of life and at least economic development as well, because you've got horns that have gone away and things like that. But just wanted to echo that, John, that safety is is really
Not speeding safety, because I completely
Yeah.
agree that that should be paramount. But the New York Times, in June of last year, I gave you a copy of that when we met, about quality of life and the significant health issues and honest to God detriments to human beings that live with this kind of interrupting, not constant noise. And there's got to be a balance. I mean, safety, absolutely paramount, agreed, but quality of life really matters.
Duly noted, completely agree.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the engineer on a train, or how much discretion does he or she have in the distance from the crossing to begin sounding the horn, the length of time it is to be sounded, and the loudness of it?
The loudness is controlled, that no train horn should be above, is allowed to be above 110 decibels.
Is there a softness level?
90.
It's between 90 and 110. That's the range of these Class 1 railroad train horns. There is a public sentiment that we're considering here. Yes, absolutely. Every train engineer is required to do 2 longs, two a short and a long at every crossing.
That's numbered.
For
We're talking distance.
Yeah, the distance.
That is discretion.
The distance is 15 to 20 seconds of the train occupying the crossing, or a quarter mile. So there's a distance and a timing element of when an airport is sound entry. It's all in the federal regs, essentially.
There's a lot of discretion.
There is a lot of discretion on the sounding. That's what I think what Justin was alluding to as well, that long can be, it could be a 1 second long, or it could be a 3 second long, and the short could be real quick, sudden short, or a little bit more elongated. So there is discretion in how long he or she sounds it.
Yes, sir.
Does a train have automatic braking system, or do the operator has to brake?
I think the operator has to brake.
Yeah. The issue with, like, back to rail safety, there's a lot of weight behind these trains. It takes a while for them to get up to speed, and obviously then it takes a long time to slow them down. Commuter trains are different than freight trains, but a freight train, for instance, can take up to a mile to stop. So if something's detected ahead, it's still, it's not like a motorcycle or a passenger vehicle where you can slam on the brakes right away and react. It oftentimes is too late, and that, again, kind of gets back to that safety element of the concept.
One thing we were talking about before is that I think overall, the sound of the train horns actually exceeds that of highway noise, correct? In reading everything, right? And so much federal funding has gone towards building walls to abate noise along the highways. Obviously, that's the Federal Highway Administration versus the trains. But is there, talking about being kind of using some ingenuity to raise money, right? Has anyone tried to tackle that, saying, this is a larger concern, we believe in safety, we need to do this, but are there federal dollars to be found going that similar route? Is my question.
It hasn't really been flushed out, to be honest. All of the DOTs, all 50 state DOTs, as well as the feds, essentially, they're worried about the slippery slope of starting, if they fund a quiet zone here, then they're going to fund a quiet zone 10 miles down the tracks and neighboring communities on the rail lines. It ends up in a slippery slope, right? Because where do you draw the line? So they're very reluctant to do that. From a community health standpoint, that's an excellent idea, and I don't know enough about public health to actually know the funding mechanisms, but the woman sitting next to you raises a great point that individual health element is significant. I've heard that for years. I've done quiet zones for 20 plus years here, and that is it is a real thing. So,
what is the value of public health? It's difficult to put a number to that, I think, at the end of the day.
Well, actually, $20 million.
Yeah.
We do have this now. These are pretty hard to get, these quiet zones. There's only one in the state of Connecticut. So
where is it?
Stonington. Only one. So hard to get. So one thing I'll commit to, and I don't know why I make these commitments, but I will. I will be a single point of contact for trying to answer the next question about, are we going to be able to fund this? So I'll coordinate with Yana and with Luke for the city of Stamford to see what's next in terms of how they want to have the discussions in their respective communities. And I'll try to get to that in the next 30 to 60 days to see what these respective towns think about that, and then write up a summary which we can distribute to a distribution list I think was created for this, and then certainly post in the press release for a more a broader community.
And we hope to share the same sentiments as you do.
Well, I'm enthusiastic about this. I needed to be defibrillated when they told me that number, but when I got out of the cardiac care unit, then yes, I'm motivated about it, but it's, this is not a trivial amount of money. I just want to be clear. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question, because I know that there are a lot of different ways that you're going to look at financing this, be it grants or whatever else. Has anybody considered public-private partnerships?
Yeah, the question is what kinds of private entities would sign up for this? I think I did have a couple of discussions about that. Part of the problem is that it's a fairly narrowly defined group of folks that have really only one commonality, and it's geographic as opposed to a shared interest. And so trying to find that right set of private entities that would be motivated to spend their money to benefit that type of collection of people. A couple of comments that I got that said that might be a harder lift. But it's something we could try. We would just need somebody to champion an effort to go out and start conversations with private groups to say, if we were to do something like this, and you guys could pony up some money to help us with this, what would that look like? I think it would have to be a fairly substantial sum in order to justify the work involved, but absolutely, let's see who's out there. So if you're watching, bring your checkbook.
John, I hate to keep piling on here, but it's an excellent idea, and like you said, the private, where's the private come from? One avenue, though, again, might be that philanthropic from a community health standpoint of a nonprofit or something. Some of these more well-endowed nonprofits that would say, hey,
have you guys seen any public-private partnerships in other quiet zones that you looked at?
There was one I did in Iowa probably 10 or 15 years ago, probably. The study, the numbers weren't nearly as significant, but it was funded by a lot of residents that were interested in this.
Or affected by the noise itself.
Correct. There was actually a Buddhist temple that was part of it, and they contributed some because it disrupted the religious practices and things. So
that's good. And then in terms of other quiet zones that you've seen across the country, have most of them been really funded by the municipalities that wanted them, or?
Overwhelmingly so. Yep, that's the majority of our clients are public investing. The benefits of implementing a quiet zone are really realized at that local level. So I think that's sort of the federal stance right now for not providing these funds, is that those benefits are really local benefits.
Other questions?
Is there any, look, the MTA is making money by driving through the community here in Lowell, right? And everybody walked in kind of had eyes wide open buying houses where they did. So, we all kind of made that conscious decision. But is there any money that would be coming from them to help kind of defrag some of the cost here?
I think the answer is no, but you guys would know better.
They'll have to make their own decision. We're not rail spokespersons, and we can't speak for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's not a long track record of them supporting stuff like this. Not any, as far as I know.
They're not the infrastructure of loading. There's an operator on the railroad as well.
Right.
So the state of Connecticut owns that.
Other questions? Okay, I did want to thank Vesta and Andrew. You guys are pros. Todd, thank you. Kristen, thanks. Like I said, I will stay in touch somehow. There's been some email communications and distribution lists that I'll get a hold of. You guys can reach me at any time. Town of Darien website. I'm easy to find. And yes, sir.
Can I just make one final? I just want to say thank you. You all know what it's like to live near the train line, right? And the hopelessness of the loss of sleep for families. I'm really, really grateful for everyone that put the time in for this. Whether it goes somewhere or it doesn't go somewhere, the fact that they're really working on it, Mr. Zagrowski, I'm really grateful for your leadership in this as well. Todd, I know you've worked on it for years. I'm just really super grateful you're giving us some hope about it. There's something that we can pursue. So thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely, that's what we're here for, really. So, okay. So we'll be in touch sometime next 60 days before Thanksgiving to try to get out some summary as to where each of the 3 towns stand. And we will go from there. Anybody have any last comments or questions? Yes,
I
sir.
don't think this has been very well publicized. I found out via email about this, but there have been no articles in local newspapers.
We do it in the town newsletter. I've talked about it many times. It's hard to, I guess I was surprised at the number of things that we do, at least in Darien, where I've talked about it to I'm blue in the face, and there's still 500 people saying, we didn't know a thing about this. So I will try to get out the word further on this to let people know, but there's been a pretty good distribution list for folks who are directly affected by this that I think grows every day as interested parties. The one thing I would urge each of you to do is for folks that you know that are not here, please let them know about this. Justin or Todd, when does this study get published or posted so people can look at it?
Imminent. We'll be posting this.
Because this was the last step in the process, was holding this hearing, which we had to do in order for this to get wrapped up. But this will be available shortly. It'll certainly be on the WestCOG website, and I'll make arrangements to post it in Darien. I'm sure the other towns will do as well. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I wrote a little something, if
Great.
that's okay, to share. So I
Okay.
can
I hope it's haiku or
Sorry?
no, poetry or is it something really? I'm just kidding you. It's late and I'm tired.
Do you want to come up here to the mic?
Oh gosh, okay, sure.
You'll do great.
Here, here's a copy for somebody. But just for context, and I'm glad we're sort of among friends, my house is in the severe zone of Richmond Hill and New Canaan. I'm joined by a neighbor, and though many people in my neighborhood are not here, this is the chatter that we talk about on our walks when we pass each other, and so anyway. Okay, I called it a mother's heartfelt message. Anyways, I don't know why I'm gonna get emotional, but to the point of this being such a, it is an emotionally charged topic when you have to deal with this day in and day out, so forgive me. But anyway, okay. When I heard there'd be a meeting for the train noise, I knew that I would drop everything and make sure to be in attendance. While some of my neighbors do, I do not have loads of research to back up my message, though I know there has been lots of improvements and research to allow effective change for Richmond Hill and other crossings to become quiet zones, and I hope that this will be the result of that meeting. What I do have is real life experience living with this issue, and it has had real effects on the quality of life, sleep, daily functioning, mood, productivity, and many other things having to do with the lives and sleep of me and my children. When we moved into New Canaan in our home in early 2023, I knew we were close to the tracks, but I never suspected that a town of that caliber would allow for a train to be as destructive as it is. We paid a handsome sum for our home, but in reality, we have paid so much more at this point with the sacrifice to our peace and harmony. The Richmond Hill train has had a true devastating effect on the quality of sleep and life, and the sleep of my baby since coming home from the hospital, a mere 11 months ago. If you were in my house, this is what you would hear from just one train. A single train lays on the horn 3 to 4 times on 4 separate occasions just to pull into the train station. Once it pulls into the train station, a mere 15 minutes later it's pulling out, repeating the same destructive pattern. This is all while listening to the loud chirping of the ding, 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 ding of the railroad crossing. Now imagine this on repeat until the late hours of the night and into the early hours of the morning. Here's the train pattern I observed. I went into more detail, but we all know what that sounds like. Tell me, how is it possible to raise a family in this environment? How is a baby supposed to nap, stay asleep into the night and in the morning? How are children supposed to stay asleep for school days and wake up rested and energized? Now my home is filled with earplugs and noise machines, but nothing is enough to combat these intrusive sounds. But the real question is, why should we have to? I know there are many places with high-speed trains that have implemented quiet zones, okay, so we all know that. As a town, I believe it is possible to have both a great commuting environment for those needing and wanting to be in the city, and a great living environment as well. We need to give people more credit when it comes to train safety.
using common sense. And I understand that's not at our discretion, but safety measures first. But, and I'd be happy to talk more. And I feel like I'm in a safe place among friends here wanting the same things. But for our town councils, I really hope that you can understand and really put this as a priority, because everything I said is true. It's just really has such a devastating impact on the day-to-day.
And thank you for representing our group.
Yeah, I think I can speak for everyone here. We are highly empathetic to that. It's terrible to have that type of noise and disruption in your life. All I can do is commit to leading a process to test next steps. That's really all we can do, because keep in mind, even though you've got the chief executives of 2 of these towns, there are a ton of people behind us and then other boards and commissions that have to approve something of this magnitude. And all we can do is make sure that this particular project is publicized in these towns, that other officials in our towns understand it, they have a chance to react to it, to ask questions, and get back to us as to whether they can be supportive. So I certainly will try to do that in my town. But keep in mind, there are a lot of other interests that are both competing for money and have different perspectives, and will have a point of view on all this. It's up to us to make sure they understand that the opportunity around this investment, and I will commit to doing that and committing to ask the other 2 towns the same question. But I appreciate you taking that. It takes bravery to make a statement like that. Good for you. Thank you, sir.
Just one question, kind of building on this. In the meantime, obviously this is going to take several years to if it does go through. Is there any kind of retraining that some of these engineers can go through? Because it's not constant, okay? I mean, you hear the noise, and I don't want to minimize what's it, but during the day, sometimes my wife works at the food bank, which is literally 3 buildings away from the train tracks. During the day, they barely hear it. And the engineers who drive in the day, it's literally minimum, and the noise is a little less, and we don't hear it back where we live. I'm in the blue zone on one of those. So I am a bit further away. But at night, there's like 2 or 3 engineers who are obnoxious about laying on the horn for several seconds at a time. And it makes it miserable. And it's worse at night than it is during the day.
He's not wrong. I actually left it out. I said sometimes I think the conductors really hate this town. Their fierceness and length at which they hold their horns at certain hours that you would say,
Plus, it's got to be
well beyond 3, 4. Sometimes they lay on
Do you guys have a perspective on that in terms of their discretion, and whether there's training or anything that can be done on that? That might help.
Yeah, so there's a couple factors at play, and don't get me wrong, I understand your perspective. I've given a lot of these presentations with a lot of communities just like you that are saying how do we make it stop. So what I'm going to say, I'm not challenging you or not trying to be combative or conflictive here. I'm just more giving you the perspective a little bit. One thing here, the day versus night. So in daytime, one of the reasons it might not be heard as much is because there's a lot more hustle and bustle of daytime traffic.
No. I'm going to cut you off right there. Because that's not the case.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not about the hustle and bustle. It's not about, I'm talking about this thing standing, my wife works, the train track is right behind her building.
Okay.
And they barely hear it. They do it according to whatever the rules are. If it's based on the SWIFT Act, or it's Metro North rules about the long, short, whatever that sequence is, they keep it reasonable.
Sure.
At night, they are 10 times more obnoxious about it.
Okay. No.
I do not hear them at all during the day doing it the way they do it at night.
Yeah.
He's right. The train goes through my backyard.
Okay. No.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I was just more kind of talking about noise studies in general. But but in this particular case, then, building off of what you said, which I do take as true. Don't get me wrong. The discretion is really up to that locomotive engineer, the conductor themselves. And what they have to do, what they're regulated to do, is that too long is a short and a long sequence. How long is long, how short is short, how...
Don't those rules have a minimum for what that amount of time should be? I believe it's 2 or 3 seconds training to do the minimum time.
Why can't that be automated? Why can't that be automated? Like, that should be an easy fix, and then like, okay, you can have a manual horn, but you hit that button.
There's technology.
So for stuff like that, is there, what's the right destination for that type of complaint? It's a completely valid point.
Could it be an education campaign with the railroad to educate their engineers? There's nothing wrong with a policy recommendation as a part of this. We're recommending a lot of construction and implementation improvements. There's nothing wrong with.
Has this come up in any other studies you've done where there's disparities? So how have those communities addressed it?
A lot of time, I mean, there's a public relations person for the railroads, that, if you have a complaint type of thing, that's one avenue to start with. Because you're right, there's variations and there's a discrepancy there. But what the railroad is often going to do is they're going to defend their staff saying, hey, there was something there that.
I've had conversations at length with the conductors. I commute too, so.
I know.
I've talked to them and they're like, your town can change. You've got to work for your town.
Right.
That's what they do.
I know, and I say the same thing because they, but why is it every night, right? Why is it every, they're on a shift, but it's, so you kind of know the person, they can figure out.
I'm sorry, say that again. The guy said that.
Oh, they're like, what their response is they fall back to say, we have certain requirements from whatever, the MTA, and you have to take it up with your town. So I'm not saying we can't affect change for that, but it's, each conductor is their own person.
You got a lot of talent.
We have no impact on.
No, meaning
MTA, so take it up with your town is an interesting response.
Meaning all of this.
Do this, right.
This, yeah, not that.
But there's also federal stuff that is overseeing some of this volume, and it was changed a number of years ago due to accidents. And so I would urge a push on our federal legislators because that is where it gets changed. It isn't here.
It's not at the state level either.
We can advocate and look at these costs, but the real power to change these regulations lie with your federal legislators.
Tracy, has any of this come up at state level that you're?
Well, I was just going to
experience with?
suggest that maybe we do a joint letter to the MTA because it's both of our communities.
Yeah, so Representative Davis represents Canaan, so we can certainly.
I think it doesn't hurt, and I think it's a good. I know I used to live in Palo Alto, California, and they actually have it recorded ones now, where they used to have automatic ones. So maybe we can inquire about that.
Yeah, we'll get together.
Yeah, we can do that. That's a good suggestion.
And it's under the, not assumption, but that this is sort of the Band-Aid for the intermediate term.
Correct.
Ideally, 2 years. This is still the.
This is the goal,
gold
but
standard.
in terms of stuff that we could pursue through communication that, would be, well, anything's low cost of this, that would help at least in the interim to at least pursue this. Yes, sir.
I have an observation. I live in a townhouse community off Camp Avenue, River's Edge, and behind us, cemetery. And along the entire property, when the developer built this thing, he put in like the fence that someone mentioned, like what they do on the throughways, but this thing is a very tall cement fence, would block out everything. These trains get to the end of that fence and they're heading for the cemetery, and they're leaning on this thing. Nobody in the cemetery is getting up and jumping in front of this thing. And it's mostly in the morning. I guess that when they send the train from Stanford up into New Canaan to get ready for the first train out about 5:30 in the morning.
5 o'clock.
That's when they're leaning the most on this thing. And you can't. The first time I heard it, I mean, we moved in last July after living in New Canaan for 33 years. And didn't hear a thing because you didn't know that that spur was shut down until Labor Day. And then that first day, at 5 o'clock in the morning, as that train is coming around that bend, it went crazy. And it's,
And to further what he's saying, I live in the first house on Greenwood Avenue, closest to the Camp Avenue crossing, and when that horn blasts, I can't raise my windows in the summer. I get 3 hours of sleep every night. It's ridiculous. Something has to be done.
Thank you.
Those blasts, I have to cover my ears every 20 minutes.
Yes, sir.
I think, to the point back here, I think we've reached out to Congressman Hines, and his office didn't want to hear anything about it. I think everyone here should reach out to Hines, and I think the towns should actually write a letter together to Hines, because
Yeah, I think
that's
if you get a letter signed by Deanna, Tracy, me, and Mayor Simmons, if she is agreeable, that letter will get a reply.
And the U.S. and Senator.
Yeah. And we will endeavor to do that. Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about things over here that's costing several $1 million to do. And we know that's not going to happen. It just costs too much. What we're talking about here costs nothing. It's just asking people to be kind.
Right, so that's, but as Deanna says, as Deanna says,
Shorter? A
as
little
Deanna
quieter?
says, the right.
To be
the
conscious
right-
of the fact that they're going through a neighborhood? That's really what we're asking.
Yeah, and that's a request we'll place, but Deanna says that the right folks to respond to that are our federal elected officials, and they will get a letter from us. Yes,
Should we also talk to MTA? Because I've done this from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. There's nobody on the train. And that's when it's loud also. We can record that and show them that, look, this is an empty train going here from New Canaan to Stanford or whatever.
I think it's louder in the morning.
well, that was a suggestion earlier, whether MTA would adjust the schedule and replace it with a bus after 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, we talked to them.
There'd be nobody on the bus either. We have not had, right, we have not had that conversation. Trevor?
Well, look, I think that that's all spitting in the wind a little bit. I think we have 3 financially savvy towns. While that $20 million number maybe comes down to 10, it may look daunting, spread out between the houses that they show are affected, or again, these 3 financially savvy towns, there are some skillful, artful, creative ways you can finance that, and it won't be that big of a financial burden to the towns, to the people affected, to various different parties. And then if there's grant money out there, even better. But I think that this is something that, again, that number might be big, is not that big for these 3 communities. And would add a lot, given that it spurs right through those 3 communities. So,
Duly enough. Thank you. What else? Sorry.
But they're also being a CPA, so if you go line by line on the budget, you can find money, wastage and stuff that can be voted into this.
We're going to tell you, I'm not quite sure we've got that much money lying around on the couch, but okay.
There are projects that are.
I did that last year. It isn't as easy as you
We are veterans of a few of those battles. So
Yeah.
You need a CPA.
Okay. What else? Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. You gentlemen again, Todd, Kristen.